Hi, good afternoon. I am Jess Searles. Thanks for being here this afternoon. Hopefully you were able to find a lunch, kind of digest both your food and all of the learning that you've had from the past day and a half, because there's a lot of good sessions, a lot of information with some really packed days. So hopefully you had some time to just sit and decompress, maybe meet with a few people and do some processing over lunch. So thanks for coming back and joining after lunch. We'll go into today really looking at enhancing outcomes for all students preparing for elementary school, and this is part 2. Part 1 we had at the 11 o'clock session. It really focused on building knowledge around letter sounds and shared reading and dialogue around text. Part 2 is going to focus more on executive function and some social emotional learning parts of the pre-K equation, and really also just thinking through how that translates into kindergarten and their core instruction when they get into kindergarten, any intervention time, how these skills transfer, and the more that we can get these things in place in that pre-K setting and get students acclimated to them and introduced to them and comfortable with skills both in the reading realm and in that more socio-emotional piece, getting them into that more formalized elementary school setting. So for this session, really looking at focusing on ways to improve social, emotional, and executive functioning skills that support young learners and how we can use those skills to really bolster and help with the work around literacy instruction for these students. There are handouts online. They weren't working in the first session. They may be up and working now, but I will give you some pause and process time after we go over several of these recommendations, and really just thinking as you're going through the content, thinking about anything that reinforces your current practice, so something that you're already doing in your setting. The exclamation point will really symbolize that wow or the aha, some new learning that you may take away from today. A next step or research to practice, so how can you take something you've learned today and do a next step with that? So what could you change about your current practice based on what you learned today? And then there's a question mark on that handouts guide to really think about what is something you want to find out more about, or something that you still have a question about to explore a bit more. This session is intended for educators, program directors, educational coordinators, and parents, caregivers. So just a really quick survey to see kind of the lay of the land, who we have in the room. Educators, hands up. Nice. Program directors. Great. And educational coordinators, state organization leads. Great. And then parents and caregivers, and some of you may have multiple roles in that. Great. Thank you for being here. How many of you were in session 1? And I see some familiar faces, so I'm seeing some connections there between that first session. So thanks for being here for part 2 as well. All right, looking just at me really quickly, I am Jess Searles. I work currently with the university, Boston University, worked with University of Oregon in their early reading, early literacy section, both at UO and at University of Oregon and at BU at Boston University, really looking at curriculum development, design, and bringing research to practice. So thinking about what we're learning out of the university research and field, and bringing that to the field experience. So kind of a foot in the research door, a foot in the teaching implementation door, and really trying to get those evidence-based practices translating to really meet students. That's why we're doing the research. So how do we get those things actually having impact and supporting students in classrooms? We are going to be going over some resources from the What Works Clearinghouse, and these are the one that we're going to be looking at are particular put out by the Institute of Educational Sciences, or IES, and they are IES practice guides. So you may hear me refer to that several times throughout the session. What those really are is taking any existing research that we have throughout the field of education and condensing it into what do we have strong evidence, strong support for being effective in certain scenarios and situations. So for example, this here is really looking at making those research-based decisions. We have the information, how do we get it into practice? The one that we're looking at today, specifically in this session, is Preparing Young Children for School. It was published in August 2022, It is one of multiple practice guides. I actually have the website up. I'll take you to in a minute and just let you see where all the other practice guides are. There's a ton of them. This being one that is recommended for ages 3 through 5-year-olds. So any research that we had in the field between the years of 2005 and 2020 that met really high quality expectations of what the research study design had to be. And out of those years of study, 15 years of research, tons and tons and tons of citations and articles within that field, there were 47 studies that really went into rigorous enough design and metrics in their studies to qualify for being part of the practice guide and informing the decisions in that practice guide. So it takes all of those research articles, makes you not have to be the researcher and the one digesting all of that info. Instead, they've put it into this practice guide to really make it practitioner friendly and user friendly. So those research practices are getting to the students there. And then there is a panel of multiple people that vetted the resources, put the practice guide together, assembled the recommendations around those practice guides. So just as a little here, I'll pull up your practice guide piece. If you just Google IES practice guides, it will pull up the Google search. Just click the one that says IES practice guides. And then all of these are IES practice guides. And they're ones for math. There's ones for reading. There's ones for multilingual learners. There's ones for post-secondary. And it's all looking at the research and putting that research into condensing it down into anywhere from usually about 4 to 7 or 8 recommendations and action steps to take for each of those recommendations. There's one for intervention. There's one for foundational skills for K-3. So lots and lots of different ones where they've taken the research and really put it into those recommendations for practice. So again, IES practice guides, Google search will get you there to find more of those practice guides if there's something else you're interested in looking at. The recommendations in this practice guide is, there are 7 of them, and we're really going to look at the first 2 in the practice guide for teaching early learners. One is regularly provide intentional, engaging instruction and practice for focus really on social emotional skills. And then the second recommendation is strengthen children's executive function skills using specific games and activities. So how do we address both your socio-emotional and your executive function? And how then do we embed that into our learning tasks? Each of the practice guides have a level of evidence, which this is pulling from all of those 47 studies and saying we have minimal, moderate, or strong evidence that is an evidence-based practice. We have research behind the practice that it is effective in classrooms when working with students. The next 2 recommendations are around understanding of math and conversations around math concepts. And then 5, 6, and 7 are around language. So looking at development of sounds, making those connections between sounds and the letters that represents those sounds, and then language based around your text that you're reading. There are 5 overarching themes to this particular practice guide, all focused on the importance of intentional instruction and interaction and conversation, that lessons build sequentially. So we're starting with things that are easy, very easy skills, things that students are more familiar with, and building levels of complexity throughout the lessons and throughout the year. The importance of scheduling time for intentional learning, and then recognizing everyone's backgrounds and experiences. And as we're thinking especially about that transition from pre-K to kindergarten, all of these are important parts of kindergarten instruction too, right? Being intentional about how we plan our time, building things sequentially, and helping with that transition from a pre-K environment to an early elementary school environment. Targeted social emotional skills can include, this isn't an exhaustive list, but kind of level set for this presentation and the practice guide in general, these are some of those skills that we'll be referring to when I refer to social emotional skills. So things like identifying and understanding your own feelings, accurately reading and comprehending emotional states in others. So being able to look out and gauge how you're feeling, what your body language is telling me, what your facial expressions are telling me, being able to gauge that from a student standpoint. Regulating one's behavior, managing strong emotions and expressing them in a constructive way, developing empathy for others, and establishing and sustaining relationships. And this is really, they're pre-K, but you could see this and like, this is also adult emotional pieces that to function in a productive way around other people, we do have to regulate our own behavior, and we do have to have these ways of establishing and sustaining relationships. And that work starts where you all are, in the classroom with pre-K learners, but it impacts how you interact even as adults with that social emotional learning there and having those skills in place. So recommendation 1 for this practice guide is to provide intentional, engaging instruction and practice focused on social emotional skills. And then right under it in every practice guide recommendation within the practice guide is how to carry that out. So really like how-to steps. What can we actively do with intentionality to address that recommendation? So one of these is following a curriculum that promotes incremental social emotional learning. So it starts with something small, something easy, something more approachable, and will slowly build to more complex ideas and ways of addressing that social emotional learning. It's intentionally devoting time to teach those social emotional skills in an engaging way, planning staged activities for children to practice social emotional skills, taking advantage of naturally occurring situations to really reinforce some of those skills, and then informing parents and caregivers and guardians about what you're doing with students in that pre-K setting and how they can support that in the home environment and when they're not with you in the pre-K setting. In this section, we're going to really look and kind of unpack 1, 2, and 5. The practice guide will unpack all of those in more depth, but because of time, we're not going to unpack all of those. We'll really look more closely at how to 1, 2, and 5. So with 1, following a curriculum that promotes incremental social emotional learning. Using a curriculum with a scope and sequence, that's not that much different than what we would hope to find in like a K-5 environment. You're using a scope and sequence that builds from simple to complex. Lessons build on one another as students are working their way through the curriculum and through the lessons. Looking at lots of time to practice and time to interact with each other as we build those skills. Beginning instruction in an appropriate place for the age and the developmental level and the needs of the students in that setting. And then considering cultural differences and ways children learn to express and regulate those emotions, because how one student may express and regulate may be different based on those cultural differences there, and being understanding of that. There are a couple of resources within the practice guide of where to go if you're not sure what program would help with this. So one website for that is this Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, and they have a program guide that essentially you can go in and click into and find a program that works for the demographic that you're working with, for the skills that you're looking to teach, and they're all evidence-based. And it will give you recommendations based on information that you input into the system to select a program for social emotional learning that fits your context. So that's really helpful guide. You put a team together and then look at your needs and what are your needs, and then that kind of spits out, that's probably not a good term, it generates ideas of programs that you can use to identify and compare different SEL programs to give you some ideas of evidence-based programs that are sequential. They do start with that scope and sequence for students there. And then the Blueprint Program Search. This is from that Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development. Very similar tool on their website. Again, taking into account the research that has gone into the program development for the ones that it has on the website. You can look at the program outcomes, so what demographics were part of the studies, what did it show to be evidence-based and it had significant impact on or not. So it looks at your program outcomes, what the target population was of each of those studies using those programs, what the program specifics are, so what is the program teaching, what is it hitting on, what skills are covered, and then looking at those risk and protective factors. So again, it's another resource. If you're looking for a program and you're not really sure where to start, These are both resources that can help with that and looking at what are you looking for and then what kind of matches up with what you're looking for that's grounded in research and evidence. So you know what you're choosing is an evidence-based program to address the needs that you have in your setting. And then What Works Clearinghouse, we've already talked about a little bit. That's where the practice guides came from. They also evaluate programs and have tools on their website to let you see like what are kind of abstract write-ups and where is the research coming from for programs around SEL learning. How-to step 2 for intentional engaging instruction and practice is really looking at devoting time to teaching social emotional skills in a really engaging way. Thinking about how can we get students involved in the process. We're not just like talking to them and generate, like I'm doing all the work, but how can we get students involved in it? How can we engage them in the work around social emotional learning? So the first bullet here is dedicating 10 to 20 minutes, 1 to 2 times a week to teach social emotional skills. Setting aside time throughout the week to practice those skills. So after we've taught it, giving them lots and lots of time to practice and feedback. How is it going? What are we doing as designed and intended? And what do we need to like pull back and do a little bit of reteaching around and a little more practice with? Using brief and engaging ways in lessons to teach those new social emotional skills and thinking about things like stories and puppets and role plays, getting them engaged in that learning and making it exciting and fun for them. And then teaching students vocabulary and phrases to use to help them communicate their feelings and thoughts with others. So how can we provide sentence frames for them? How can we talk about the different layers of feelings? Maybe I'm sad, but I could also be upset. I could also be angry. Like how are all of these things different but the same, and how are they related, and how can I articulate those? I think even as adults, sometimes we have a hard time articulating feelings and like what our body's doing and how my body's telling me how I'm feeling, and talking to students about that, getting them some vocabulary to use with us, with themselves, and with one another. So this is one, and it's pulled straight from the practice guide, and it is using a puppet to teach social emotional skills. And like kids go crazy with puppets. Like even like 4th and 5th graders, you can pull out puppets sometimes. They're like, yes. Your pre-K and even into kindergarten love the approach of puppets. And like also this is as fun as you make it, right? So if I'm standing with my puppet and I'm like, well, I'm very angry today, that's not going to be very engaging. So you've got to bring your energy level and your engagement into the work as well. So it does take some creativity and being a little silly and a little fun to keep it engaging. But this one with the turtle is taking them through the steps, and you're recognizing your feelings, then you're stopping your body, then looking at how are you going to like kind of calm down and self-regulate, and then like how do you know when you're ready to like come back out and engage in a constructive way with folks. So for example, I could have a turtle and we're thinking about being angry, and I can have my turtle and recognizing my feelings. I am feeling very angry. I want to go down the slide and someone's on it. There's a long line, right? And I'm angry. I'm ready to, and my turtle puppet can cross its arms and he's very mad. And then my step 2 is like, stop your body. Like recognizing what my body's doing. My arms are crossed. I might be stomping. I need to like stop my body and regulate my body's reaction to my anger. And then step 3 is thinking, I'm going to take some deep breaths. So here my turtle little puppet tucks inside his shell. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths and get myself calm, get myself regulated. And then step 4, popping back out of my turtle, my turtle puppet shell, I'm ready to interact. I know what I can do. I can fix this problem by talking to my friend while I wait in line, and then it will be my turn to go down the slide so I can play, right? So I've had this like, I've got to stop. I've got to think about what my body's doing. I need to take a breath. I need to take a break and figure out how I could come to a resolution to interact with those feelings. The feelings are there. They're valid. How are we going to interact with them in a healthy way? And then this one is through Puppets and a book. It's part of the Dinosaur School SEL curriculum. Some of you may be familiar with that curriculum. It is one of the curricula that comes up in the search items in the resources for those evidence-based curricula in those websites that I've mentioned before. But we'll watch just a little bit of this. It's really thinking about that recommendation and using books and stories And then this one integrates puppets as well as they're interacting with this book. And they're looking at apologizing, which is sometimes really, really, really difficult for students to do, is to apologize and take some accountability for their actions. So she's reading a book about Zach. So we'll just watch a portion of this so you'll kind of get a feel for it. Sorry, it's so tiny on my screen, it's hard to see. There we go.
Our book we're going to read is Zach Apologizes. What did he do wrong, Miss Chris? We don't know yet, so let's see. He already doesn't look super happy. Okay, here we go. Alex was playing with Zach's Robo-Rocket Cruiser again. That probably means he plays with it all the time.
Yep,
Yeah, I think that's what it means. It made Zach so mad. He forgot all about his manners.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. He forgot all about his manners and he pushed his little brother down.
Oh no, that's bad.
I would get in so much trouble.
Me too.
I have a sister. If I pushed her, I would get in
Oh, yeah.
so much trouble here.
Oh yeah, Sally.
Go ahead and turn the page.
I know Sally.
It's mine, Zach yelled. You pushed me. Well, you started it. Okay, sometimes I might sound.
Right, which is very realistic for some of our students in our classrooms and in their home setting. It goes through the rest of the story, and it goes through what kind of plays out for Zach and how he's processing that piece. And then toward the end of the book, there's a strategy for apologies. So looking at the last part of the book, Zach is writing his apology, and it gives students a tool to use. So we'll play that part so you can see kind of how it wraps up here.
For apology, make a square on a piece of paper, draw lines to divide it into 4 smaller squares, fill in the squares with your answers to the steps above. You can use words or pictures. When you're done, put your apology into action. If you've done something wrong or hurtful, you can make it right again. Just like Zach did. Apologizing takes courage, but you can do it. Oh, I really like that story because, yeah, I know we all make mistakes, especially when we get frustrated. And I know right now we're spending a lot of time at home and with our brothers and sisters, and it gets really hard sometimes because we make mistakes, and then it's important to make them right again. Yes,
So then the story piece of that, bringing in the puppet to do some of that processing and having students to make some of those connections. We talked in the first session about pause points and giving students time to process and talk with one another so they could talk about, a time that they were frustrated, that they were angry, that they maybe pushed a sibling or a classmate down. And then how, when we come back to that resolution piece, how did they resolve that? Did they resolve it, right? And then how could we do that and how could we do that in a way that is approachable to students? So the 4 square here, if you were using this and kind of teaching it in your classroom, teaching how to use that 4 square, Zach walks through it in the story, and then thinking about communication at home, sending that 4 square home. And saying, this is what we've worked with, this is how we identified a problem, drawing pictures, and talking about the pictures that they drew to come to that whole conflict resolution is really what you're teaching, right? You did something, it made me mad, I did this thing, and now we need to apologize for it and really figure out how we're going to make it right and move forward. So step 5 here, again around that intentional engaging instruction and practice to inform parents and caregivers and guardians about social emotional skills children are learning so those skills can be practiced and reinforced in other settings. So they're starting to apply what they're learning in your setting to other settings. The apologies is not just something that happens at school. Apologies could happen in multiple contexts, and helping caregivers help generalize and apply and transfer some of those skills that they're working on in the pre-K setting. So how we could do that, emailing parents and families and caregivers or sending notes to inform them of the social emotional skills students are learning. providing guidance, suggestions, and concrete examples on how parents, families, and caregivers can support their child's social and emotional learning and development, including language and vocabulary that corresponds to the social and emotional skill, and providing translated letters and resources to the primary language of parents, families, and caregivers when possible. So thinking about that language piece of things for families and families that you may be serving in your setting. Often programs that work for, like that are evidence-based social emotional learning programs have some of these generated for them already that are ready-made and ready to be sent home that align with the program that you're teaching. So for example, this is one for take-home letters. And take-home letters, just an example of what some activities there are. Children might be learning to cooperate and work together. So how can we help each other pick up toys? How can we work together to prepare a meal? So giving families at home ideas of cooperation activities. How can we reinforce that in a different setting? Coping with strong emotions, taking a deep breath. So if they learned about the turtle and tucking into their shell and taking deep breaths, letting families know that. So we're working on taking deep breaths to calm down and regulate how we're feeling. Looking at compromising. Organizing an area of the house together where I think something may go might not be where my 3-year-old thinks something should go, and compromising on where we're going to put these things, right? We're going to organize a section of the house. Sharing a snack with another family member, and talking about how we share and sharing your snacks with them, right? That whole back and forth and that two-sided sharing piece. And then playing fairly, taking turns, being a gracious winner or a loser. Often that will trigger for some students. When they lose, they don't like losing. So how can we incorporate that not only in our setting, but reinforce that in the home? Playing a board game as a family, taking turns with siblings on preferred activities, like the slide. I got really mad when it was my turn on the slide, and like I couldn't get there because people wanted to be there before me. And then choosing which book to read first. So things that seem pretty straightforward to us, but thinking about like all these little interactions that happen throughout the day that really do take social emotional skills to do well. And even something like choosing a book takes some like dialogue back and forth and some give and some take and some compromise. Working with parents and families and caregivers to identify those things and give them those ideas of how can I support students outside of the pre-K setting. This is one that came home with, I have a nephew that is now well into upper grade, so he's into upper elementary, he's 4th grade. But several years ago, the pre-K program that his school was using, which was Think Social was the curriculum they were using, were working on strong emotions and how to cope with strong emotions. And my nephew is blind, he also has autism, and he has some ADHD. So there's a lot of kind of coexisting factors there, and regulating emotions was not his strong suit. He had a really, really hard time with it. You've got the impulsivity from ADD, and then the autism that just reading social cues in general was tough, plus the blindness. He can't really observe you to get what you're doing because he can't see you. So a lot of just contributing factors to really make regulation of behavior really difficult. So one of the things they were working on in the program he was in was this coping with strong emotions. And he was very quick to react in a very impulsive, really engaged, passionate way. And it may be he reacted, he was screaming, throwing a fit on the floor, which would be on the size of your reaction, like this 10 piece, right? Like you are in it fully. And then like a little bit worried, a little bit angry is this 1 on the scale. And then the other piece of it was the size of my problem. So getting him to articulate, is this a big problem? It's like something that adult really needs to help me solve, or is this like a smaller problem? Like I know how to solve it myself. I've just chosen not to right now, right? So one of the things I can think of, he like loved. He's a big fan of just like any battery operated toy, and when the batteries died, it was a really big deal. There was screaming, yelling, stomping. You would really think he was major hurts. So it would throw up red flags for us, like, oh my gosh, something's really wrong. Like, is he hurt? What's going on? Which his size of reaction didn't match his size of his problem, right? So they sent this, his school sent this thermometer home with his, through email, through a parent letter. And my sister shared it with my parents and me and the people that were interacting with him in a family setting at home. And we would start using this with him. So if he like exploded and had a really explosive, impulsive behavior, we'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What's the size of the problem? And he'd be like, 2. Like, what's the size of your reaction? 9. Yeah, it didn't match. Like, it wasn't matching. What you could have solved that on your own. You didn't have to go to this place where you got yourself really aggravated and worked up. And as we talked through it and worked through it, he got a lot better at like, oh, this is the size of my problem too. It's something I can solve. I will now go solve the problem, as opposed to just letting you know that there's a really big problem when it's not really that big of a problem. So this was a really helpful tool for us because it gave us language that we could use with him. He was hearing the same language when he was with me. He was hearing the same language when he was with his grandparents. He was hearing the same language with his parents. He was hearing the same language at school. And that size of problem, size of reaction, and he got to where he'd be like, oh, that was a 2, I was an 8. Yeah, or like, that was a 1, I was a 1. And like rewarding that, right? Like, oh, you recognize that like you could go solve that. Great job for solving that on your own, right? So really, really helpful. And a lot of programs will come with things like this. In a lot of cases, it's really frustrating for parents and families because they don't know what to do. And I think that would be the situation we were in. We didn't know what to do. So this being provided by the school to help us with that really helped us as a family too. It was a win-win for everybody. So recommendation here, recommendation number 1, potential obstacle. I don't see why I need to devote time to social emotional learning with the whole class. Seems like a waste of time. I only have 3 children in my class who are disruptive, don't comply, and throw tantrums. The others are well behaved. So each of the practice guide recommendations have this like potential barrier piece and then some potential solutions for that barrier. So here one would be all students are benefiting from practicing those skills, even those who are well behaved. We all benefit from having a social emotional radar when we're interacting with other people. Children need multiple opportunities to respond, or OTR, opportunities to respond. So they're prepared to use skills in various situations, including when they enter school. So thinking about their transition from pre-K to K, they're going to be interacting with different students. They're going to be interacting with different adults. They're going to be interacting with different schedules throughout their day that may send some triggers there. Looking at children who hold emotions inside and are not expressive, though they're not expressing those emotions and they're not disruptive, they still need support in learning how to express and manage those feelings in healthy ways. So they may not voice it and you may not see it outwardly, but how do they express things that they're still dealing with, and they still got some big emotions and some big feelings, and how can we support them in developing constructive ways to handle those. So recommendation 1, pause and process. If you do have the handouts, this is there. But looking at, again, step 1, following the curriculum. Step 2, devoting time to teaching those skills. And step, should say 5 on the handout, it says 4, informing parents, families, and caregivers. So just give you some time here, a couple minutes to think about like what's something that you're already doing, you're implementing and you have it in practice, and this was just like reinforcing what you were already doing. What's a aha or a wow? What is something that you could take from here and apply to your own situation and setting? And then what's a question that you still have or a wondering that you would like to find out more about? So I'll just give you a little bit of time to process that. Sherry has the mic if anybody wants to share out any of that before we go into the next recommendation.
Was a lack of behavior is a behavior, and frequently that gets overlooked in a classroom. And if we're not focusing intentionally to teach all of the children these skills, they won't know how to process when they're faced with challenges. We really do try to observe very closely in our classrooms those children, because we do serve a lot of children with autism and different diagnoses. So that lack of behavior is a key indicator to other needs.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing. So she was saying that just sometimes lack of behavior is telling you something. So being in tune to that too. And at some point, those feelings are going to come out, likely. So how do we set them up to be successful with dealing with those before they express themselves in maybe not as constructive ways. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So our program has used the PATHS curriculum, PATHS, for years, and every year it gets more and more repetitive through the ages of why, and it validates why we're using it and how it builds upon the ages and the skills, and it covers like all the bases, and really validates why to use it and continue to use it as the kids get older and they build upon it.
Great, yes. So you're smiling right there, like, yeah, we're on the road. Yeah, and the systematic piece of that, right? It's all connected and they all build on one thing and really looking at that consistency. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Get some steps in, yeah.
I was just going to say that one of the things about the question, about the comment about not taking the time to do it for one, even if it's for one, I always tell staff, even if it's for one, you can either take the time to keep putting out fires, or you can take the time to teach the skills needed so that you don't have to keep putting out those fires. So you choose how you spend your time.
Yep. You're going to invest it in some way, right? Yeah. Make it a healthy investment. Yeah. Thank you. All right, moving into recommendation 2. So looking at recommendation 2, strengthening children's executive function skills using specific games and activities. How to carry out this recommendation. So those action steps, 1, 2, and 3 here. Using intentionally designed games to build those executive function skills, challenging children by increasing the complexity of the games and the activities over time, and embedding executive function activities in literacy and math and art and other parts of the day. So it's not we're teaching these executive function skills in isolation. How can we embed them so they can use and apply them to multiple contexts as we're going throughout the day? And then again, thinking about that transition into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, those early grades. How can they take what they're learning with you, applying it to those different skills, and then using those as they move on into those early elementary years. So really thinking about how can we embed that? How can we tie those and integrate those into one another? So there's something to attach it to. It's just not just something kind of floating in space that's in isolation. But how are we having them apply those skills? We will focus on all 3 of this recommendation in this section, starting here with just the relationship between executive function and social emotional skills. They're not the same, but they are related to one another. And in the sense, this is the figure 2.1 from the practice guide. So this is in and kind of discussed in a little more in depth in the practice guide. But thinking about the overlap there is they both contribute to self-control and self-regulation. So looking at, they do contribute to those shared pieces and what we're trying to teach and work on and develop within students. But they do kind of live in their own separate circles in a lot of ways. So when we're thinking about executive function skills, we're thinking about paying attention, attentiveness. How do we build kind of that sustained attention level with students? It's shorter in 3-year-olds than it is on 5-year-olds, and how can we build that to then set them up for success in that transition, and they can sustain attention for longer when they get into kindergarten and first grade and second grade. How can we help with that? Following directions. So again, pre-K to K transition, the more they're primed and ready to follow directions, the more successful they're going to be in making that transition, and that executive function skill has to be there in order to be able to follow directions when they get into a more formalized setting in elementary school. What about focus? How can we help students focus and attend to tasks? Switching attention, that flexibility piece. So I was attending to this and now I attend to this. Students who are often students who are on the autism spectrum have a really hard time with that flexibility piece. So like I'm on this thing and now I've got to switch to this thing, but I didn't know that switch was coming. I didn't have a heads up of that. So how can we work on that flexibility? And then that, again, thinking flexibly. How can I change rules? How can I shift rules? How can I shift my thinking, shift from one activity to the next? and not have really, really strong uncomfortable feelings around that switch. And then social emotional skills, thinking about that other side of the circle, sharing. How can I share my snack? How can I share my toys? How can I share these things with this collective community that we have in a pre-K setting? Cooperating with one another, and what is the language I use when I'm cooperating with one another, and how does it look and sound to cooperate with someone else? Developing positive relationships with both students, with both people that are their peers, and with that adult to child interaction. How can we build those positive relationships among peers and folks that are different ages from them? Identifying emotions, being able to name, I'm feeling angry and this is how my body feels. I'm feeling sad, this is what my body's doing. And being able to tie what my body feels like and what I'm processing to an actual emotion. So we can talk about those emotions and talk about how to kind of de-escalate some of those that might be a little less desired. And then social problem solving. So how can we come to the table and talk in 3, 4, 5-year-old language where we're able to come to solving a problem and being able to, again, work together. So overlap there, but definitely kind of different things going on with those executive function skills and social emotional skills. So looking at the recommendation 2 with that executive functioning, so again, thinking about this left-hand side, the paying attention, the following directions, focusing, switching, flexibility, with this next recommendation is where we're kind of talking about tasks that will help build that area and that skill circle there. So using intentionally designed games to build children's executive function skills, games that have multiple steps to help children listen and remember and follow directions as they're playing games. Games that require actions to connect a cue, whether it's a verbal cue or a visual cue or a musical cue. They're listening for a cue, and it requires you to think quickly, and it requires you to be flexible. So they're fun, but how can we teach these executive function skills through the games that we're using and designing those games with intentionality? I want to teach students to be flexible, so here's a game I can use to teach them to be flexible. Or I want to teach and work with students on how to listen and pay attention. So I'll choose this game to play with students because it really helps with that attention and holding their attention, and they have to listen and remember and cognitively process some of those things. That require only certain children, maybe those wearing green or those wearing tennis shoes or whatever your kind of quantifier is because of the taking turns. So how can we use that piece of things to encourage turn taking? Building executive functioning usually lasts 10 to 20 minutes, and then switch an activity, switch something else, do something else after you've worked on that executive function skill. And then consistent routines, so the importance of consistent greetings, the importance of consistent games, the importance of consistent closings to your day or closings to an activity. So there is some predictability in your day. Not all of it's chaos, and we know students don't generally do well with a whole lot of chaos. So how can we create some predictability while also having some flexibility in the day? And sometimes that's a tough juggle. You do want them to be able to be flexible, but they also have some routines and predictability to the general outline in the course of their day. And that really helps stay calm and stay focused and ready. I think about this one too, again with kind of reference to my nephew, the calm, focus, and ready if something was going to change, being upfront about what that change was going to be. Like our schedule's going to look a little different today, so I'm not going to greet you in the same way. Or we've got something a little different around lunchtime today, and we're going to have to change schedules just a little bit so I could still create some of that predictability, but we did also have to be flexible. So it wasn't a surprise when a schedule change was happening to really help with that maintaining calm and focus there. So a few games here, and these are pulled from the practice guide. Red light, purple light, a little bit of a variation of like red light, green light. And this one using whatever your cue is, be it a verbal or a shape or a written cue, but looking at using those circles and playing a game with students using those shapes. So I have my red square and my purple square, and if I'm holding up a red square, you'll snap. If I'm holding up a purple square, you'll tap your toes. When I hold up a red square, what are you doing? Oh yeah, they're quick. Purple. right? So that really easy for us, but like it's teaching you, you're paying attention, you have to watch what shape's coming up, you have to watch how often I'm shifting to different ones, and requiring you to be flexible. We were snapping and now we're tapping our toes. So teaching those pieces there. The freeze game is, again, looking at instructions, encouraging students to dance. I can remember playing this when I was like in elementary, like kindergarten, and I loved it. Teacher plays music, you dance as the music's playing, and then the teacher stops it, and you stop, you freeze. And it's really teaching instructions, listening, paying attention. There's a verbal cue that you have to listen to. Really thinking about choosing the music that children enjoy, so tapping into something that they're really interested in, and it's fun, and they get to move, which is like what they want to do a lot of the time anyway. So having some music that start, that stop, and they've got to pay attention to when that music starts and stops. Drum beats is another one, using different beats for that one. And as students are working through the beat of the drum, so the beat varies, and students do different things to that beat. So students are stomping to the beat, or they're walking to the beat, or they're clapping to the beat, or they're crawling to the beat, whatever your action is. And as it gets slow, or as it gets fast, they start stomping quicker, or they start walking quicker, or they start hopping quicker. Again, keeping that, you've got to listen, got to pay attention. You're listening to that auditory cue to know what you're doing during that game. And then which way, which is a which way brain builder. And this teacher stands at the front of the room. So students are standing or they're seated. The teacher watch what way the teacher's arms go, and students make their arms go that way. So again, looking at what is my visual cue, what are we all doing, and being able to shift, because now I'm doing something different. So I've got to shift what I'm doing. Recommendation 2, step 2, challenging children by increasing the complexity of games and activities over time. So thinking about flexibility, thinking about really working on that executive functioning. Once children know how to play a game and have mastered the rules, make the game more challenging, especially if it's a game that they really like. Make it a little bit harder. And there are different ways to do that. I could add more rules to my game. I could give less guidance, so I'm not cueing as often and they're having to remember and do a little more of the thinking on their own. I could increase the speed, because now you've got to be even more flexible and more attentive, because now it's faster. Now we're moving at a quicker rate. And I could change the rules. So if you've learned the rules, and I can now change the rules. Flexibility. It requires you to be able to shift your thinking a little bit. With what you used to know is now no longer the rule. Now we're going to play it this way, or now we're going to do this thing. And prompting students to reflect on how or why the game has increased in difficulty. So what are they using? What executive function skill are they having to adapt and change and utilize to be able to play that game or do the thing with success? So some examples around that. One could be add more rules, right? So we had a purple square and we had our red square, and you knew we had to tap or snap. Well, now we're learning about circles in preschool, and now we're adding more shapes. So if I hold up the red circle, you're stretching to the left. If I hold up the purple circle, you're stretching to the right. And now I can alternate between 4 different things. Ooh, right? And I'm like, oh, the other left, the other right, right? Like, oh, there was some hesitation there, yep. Left, yep, the other left, right? Again, so it gets a little more complex, right? Still working on shapes. I could be working on shapes, I could be working on colors, and I get to choose as the instructor what color these need to be, what shapes they need to be. Maybe we're learning about triangles, and I can add triangles into it, maybe take the squares away, because you're kind of bored of the squares right now, right? So thinking about how just using that one game, lots of things happening there. Your body movements, your fine motor skills, your coordination or lack thereof, right? Looking at all those pieces of adding those pieces in with that flexibility piece there. Another one, thinking about drum beats specifically, is changing the music that's playing. So I can make the music faster, I could make it slower, and if the drum beat's faster, you have to do the things quicker, If the drum beat's slower, you do the thing slower. So looking at speeding and increasing that speed. I could also change up the speed in this activity, right? If I want to make it more challenging, I switch the shapes quicker. And you have to go from snapping to stomping to stretching left, stretching right, and all kinds of things and navigate all that. And kids love it, and it's so fun. Like to be the teacher in front of you, you're like, this is really entertaining as the teacher too. Because let's be honest, you're also watching your students, and they're hilarious and really adorable. So thinking about how to switch that up, just increasing the speed changes the game. Like they have to think quicker. They have to be more flexible with what you're doing with the speed there. And then changing the rules. So here I had my freeze game, and we were dancing slowly to songs, slow songs, and quickly to fast songs, but I could reverse that and say, now we're going to dance slow to quick songs, and then dance fast to slow songs, right? Which is not what your brain really wants to do. Again, flexibility, being able to adapt, being able to think about how those rules are changing. I could change the rules going back to my shapes. I could change the rules to my shapes. You're really good at snapping and tapping. What if we change the rules? And now you're hopping and you're jumping. So as we're moving the rules, our stretching left and right are staying the same, but now we're jumping and hopping, right? And that changes the rules because now you got to think, oh, but I used to snap for that, and now I'm not snapping for that anymore. And you'll be able to see from your students who's still on the snaps, who didn't flip over with that change of the rule, or who's still tapping toes and not jumping. They didn't flip over to that rule change. So again, thinking about, again, going back to the shapes and how you can adapt that in different ways, keep it engaging for students and still really intentionally hit those cognitive processing pieces and those executive function skills. The caveat here, and it's a really important one, perhaps I should have put it like across the whole slide, but to avoid overwhelming your students, don't change all these at once, right? Make them in small increments. So gradually progress from simple to more complex rules. I wouldn't want to both speed up the game and change your claps to snaps and add new rules all at the same time, because it's just overwhelming and confusing and students will be frustrated. So thinking about how can I make those small incremental steps to still work on your flexibility and still working on that executive functioning. Yeah. Yeah, you just gotta pick. Yeah, you're good. You're good. Well, it's for the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I said I love this idea. I like I was thinking about when kids are waiting outside, when you take them as a group to the bathroom, and they have all these questions, or they have all the wiggles, and you can sit there and start holding up the shapes, and then it just would keep them engaged while other kids are using the laboratory.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. And it's working on intentionally scheduling time, and it's like using these little pockets to do something that they love, and you're working on executive function, but they're loving it, and they're having a lot of fun doing it. It's totally a skill. Yeah, I love it. Thanks for sharing that. All right, the next piece here, and I was thinking about this one. I don't think it is. I think it is, yeah, okay. So I was going to piggyback off of what you just said in the slide here. So looking at recommendation 2, step 3, embedding executive function activities in literacy, math, art, and other parts of the day. So integrating opportunities throughout the day for thinking flexibly, following directions, which is exactly what you're saying, like those little moments, like where can we grab those little moments to engage students in this, with the following directions and the problem solving and exercising self-control, even going back to the bathroom piece of things, like if you're standing in the hallway, there's still a level of self-control that you're going to have. We can't be crazy and wild and loud and disrupt everyone, so there's still that element also of doing that with self-control and teaching that as an executive skill there. Modeling the use of think time, asking students to use think time before answering a question or providing a response, so all students have a chance to think about what you're working on. And again, regulation, self-regulation of behavior. I have to stop talking and be quiet as a student so I can hear what other people are to give that time for other students to think as well. Encouraging the use of nonverbal signs, nods or thumbs up when someone else is speaking to practice self-control. giving intentional turns or checks for understanding during the lesson, not really having hands or like who can tell me and having hands go up, and how can I select students intentionally to check in and see who is kind of working with these skills and which one. Now it also teaches me as a student taking turns. It's not my turn, I didn't get called on, I can't say the answer right now, I have to wait on someone else to say the answer, and that again is that self-regulation and self-control. I can just work things out anytime I want to. Thinking about that transition to kindergarten, that's how your kindergarten, your first grade, second grade classrooms on up are working, right? We can't just blurt out things every time we want to blurt out something. Sometimes we have to like hold it for a little bit before we can share it out. So starting that and starting those conversations and those practice opportunities early for students. And then positive specific praise when those expectations are being met. And making sure that we're praising students for the activities that we're looking for. We're giving them accolades and we're being really specific about why we are responding, why we are giving them that accolation, those accolades. So integrating skills and content here. This is again pulled right from the practice guide for this table. And this one here is looking at following directions. Outside playtime or at the bathroom, waiting for the line. Playing, Simon says, one person is the leader, other students do it, probably a game a lot of you are familiar with. And then if the student doesn't do it when Simon doesn't say do it, then they are out, they sit down. So again, that listening skill, that listening function. And then remembering multiple items in a list is another one of these pieces. So thinking about how can we integrate that during literacy instruction. If I'm reading a book that has a lot of repetitive information with a list, and this gives the example of Very Hungry Caterpillar, prompting children to remember what the caterpillar already ate. So like, he ate an apple. When we get to the pears, he ate pears and an apple. And having them build on, like, what did they learn? And helping them recall, helping them remember that list of things that the caterpillar ate. Planning and problem solving, maybe during your mathematics instruction. So how can we design activities that encourage students to think out things and kind of map through things? So for example here, the example is to start your mathematics lesson with 3 blocks, and they have to build a tower out of 3 blocks. And once they've built their tower out of 3 blocks successfully, we can make it a little more challenging, increase the complexity. They have to think flexibly about how they're going to do it. Now they have 5 blocks and they have to build it successfully. Or now maybe their blocks change shape or size, and they have big blocks and small blocks that they have to make a tower out of. Or maybe they have the ones with a little arch in the cutout, and they have to figure out how they're going to stack those successfully. So thinking about how to embed that thinking, moving from simple to complex within a math lesson. And then following directions and taking turns during arts or crafts or wherever maybe you're doing an activity related to the book that you've been reading as a group, having them take steps to make a project. So they could, like, this one gives you an example of a snowman, and one student does one ball of the snowman, and the other person does the other ball of the snowman, and then another person does the other part of the snowman, and then another kid does the eyes, and they have to work together to assemble their snowman effectively. So looking at taking turns and following directions within that task you're already doing. How can we intentionally plan and intentionally think about those activities for students to really have that turn taking embedded in activities like that. Examples of positive specific praise. So when we're thinking about giving students praise, more than just good job, more than just like, well done, way to go. But what are we telling them they're doing well? And how can we really be specific with that positive praise? So example here, student's name is your blank. So blank transition quickly and quietly, sat down ready to learn. So I'm telling you exactly what I'm looking for, self-regulation behavior, you're ready to listen, which again is one of those skills that we're trying to teach students at this point. I heard blank using a feeling word when they were upset about someone taking their pencil. So if we've been working on angry, or we've been working on upset, or we've been working on mad, I could say, I heard Sherry use upset when a friend took her pencil, right? Like we've been working on that word and she was able to express, she was really feeling upset. So giving them acknowledgement there. Thank you for having your voices off while someone else was sharing their idea with us. So thinking about that turn taking and that think time. acknowledging. You all had your voices off, and I love the way you had your voices off while someone else was sharing, so they're not talking over one another. We're working in partners. I could have my two students, and I could say student 1 and student 2. I heard you using kind words and helping each other as you worked together. So again, thinking about collaborative work and giving them some positive specific praise around that, giving them some credit when they're doing those things. And then the last one is you all did such a nice job of listening and sharing your learning with each other as you read our story together today. So I was hoping you were listening, and now I'm going to acknowledge you were in fact listening, and you were part of our conversation, you were part of the discussion when it was time to discuss, you were quiet when it was time to be listening, and giving students really specific praise about when that's happening in your classrooms. So one that I thought I was coming back to the last slide, going back to your shapes again, thinking about students as they're working in, maybe like they're at a bathroom or at recess, switching who does the shape holding. So if you need to like monitor an area and they've learned this game, I can then pass these shapes off to a student, and I can go get you, to stop playing with the water in the sink, like lathering your hands, while the student becomes the person that's holding up the shapes. So just thinking about that again, flexibility. The leader is now not me, the leader is now a student. So another way to just kind of double dip there. You've got something that you need to be working on, or you need to kind of go handle. The student could take that over, or maybe someone's having a little bit of a hard time getting off of the carpet after being upset about something. Oh, let's play our shape game, and call a student up and have them play the shape game while you are working to help with some regulation in another area of the classroom. So just another way to kind of think again about the flexibility. It doesn't have to be you all the time. Sometimes it can be you passing that off to be able to do something else, or just watching and kind of observing to see how they're doing with that and how responsive they are to that. Recommendation to possible obstacle here. Looking at, is an executive function just a part of social emotional learning? I don't understand why I need to separate activities to teach each skill. And we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but these two do definitely coexist. While they both contribute to that self-control and self-regulation, there are separate pieces of that puzzle to come together to help with that self-regulation and self-control. So executive function and social emotional skills are different, but they do work together to help students with navigating their thoughts and their feelings and their behavior. Activities to develop these skills are distinct, although those often develop together. So often we're developing social emotional while we're developing this executive function, but they are separate. They kind of have their separate skill pieces there. Skill development activities are different for children of different ages, and to approach social emotional instruction and executive function activities separately to ensure the learning objectives are clear and that children aren't overwhelmed with too much new in too short of a time. So really thinking about addressing both of those buckets to really get to that self-control and self-regulation piece there. And then your recommendation to pause and process here. So we'll pause and process here. And then again, we've got the mic. We've got a mic runner. So if you've got anything that you want to share as far as just validating something you're already doing, an aha that you've had, something you can take back in and apply to your current practice, or a question or wondering that you still would like to find out more about as you're processing, flag us down and we'll have the mic come over your way. Yeah, we have the mic. Yeah, right here. Yep.
I love the idea of the voices on and off, and we can create a visual. I have a lot of DLL in my class, and we can use a visual of it's time for, instead of catch a bubble and the old standbys. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet. Need some think time, as we talked about how valuable think time is.
Mine is just sort of a related piece of when you said about why do we have to teach each thing separately? Well, why do you have to teach letter naming and letter sounds, you know, those are two different aspects of something. We've got to teach it separately. It's more than one thing.
Yeah.
It just, that makes me crazy.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Yeah, we can't just teach letter names or just teach letter sounds. They both work in tandem to help you read, but you have to have both of those pieces. Okay, with that, I'll stay if you've got questions to go through, but thank you for being here. Thanks for attending the session today. It was great to have you all in here. If you do have questions, I'll stay after to ask if you have anything that pops up. Other than that, thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time to be in the session today.